I thought, how can I possibly do it in 15 or 20 minutes? Well, to start with, I'll be 89 in about 6 weeks, so I'm probably the oldest right now. And it's been a marvelous life, and I'll start from the beginning. My parents were elderly when I was born. My dad was a doctor, my mother was a nurse, and they'd been married 15 years with no kids. And all of a sudden, there I was. And my mom was 40, my dad was 53. So she was from the South, and he was from New York State, and he brought his bride back to New York State. So I lived in Pulaski, New York, a little town between Syracuse and Watertown. My dad died when I was 8 months old, so I never knew him. But when I was 4, my mother married the most marvelous man in the world. So I had a really wonderful dad, and I get really teary about it. So anyway, small town girl. We spent many summers, most summers, parts of every summer in Virginia, my mother's home. I was an only child, but I had 17 first cousins in Virginia. So I had a big family down there and I loved it. My small town life was pretty good. My dad was a teacher. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and life was good. And when I was 9 years old, things changed, and they changed for the better, actually. My stepfather, it's a long story, had lived in China for a number of years, and he had left his daughter there when he came back, thinking he would bring her back, and he hadn't. So I had a stepsister 10 years older than I that I'd never met. And she ended up marrying a US Marine in Peking and came back. So when I was 9 years old, I met my 19-year-old stepsister who was 8 months pregnant. And I had a wonderful relationship with her and her Marine husband and her kids. So that was a delightful part of my life. Anyway, I ended up going to St. Lawrence University, and that was the beginning of my UU experience because there was a UU church there. I was a Congregationalist. I sang in the choir. I didn't pay much attention to the sermons, but I went to church every Sunday. And when I went off to college, I had to take, as a freshman, a class. St. Lawrence was founded as a Universalist university, and there was a theological school there for many years. So I had to take a class in contemporary or comparative religion, sort of. And I discovered that I really wasn't a Christian at all. I was pretty much an agnostic. So that was the beginning of my UU experience. I went to the UU church there a few times. And while I was there, like most young girls, I fell in love. It was not a very good love affair for many reasons. We never were able to finally get together. And my junior year in college, another wonderful thing happened. My sister and brother-in-law were going to Brazil. He was being sent to Rio de Janeiro to teach in the War College. And so my boyfriend and I went back to Pulaski to say goodbye to them. I wasn't going to see them for 2 years. And lo and behold, they were going on the Moore McCormick line. They had 2 staterooms, they had 3 kids, and they had 6 beds. So kind of unbeknown to me, my mother and my sister had gotten together and figured out, wow, this is a way to get Nancy away from that guy, you know. So they invited me to go to Brazil with them. And I did. I was thrilled. I raced back up to St. Lawrence and packed up my stuff and left. The college wasn't very happy with that. People didn't do it then. Anyway, I had a wonderful 6 months in Rio with my stepsister and her family, and that's a whole nother story. So I came back, and that's when I met Jack Brush, my first husband. He had graduated 3 years before I did, and I just kind of knew him vaguely. But I went back in May. I came home in May and went up to St. Lawrence for senior week for graduation, and that's when I met Jack. So I ended up going to summer school that summer because I'd missed most of my junior year. And I saw quite a bit of Jack. My other boyfriend by then was in the Army. And anyway, I got engaged to Jack Brush. And at the end of my senior year, the day before I graduated, we got married. and he was a grand guy. I was married to Jack for 24 years. We had 3 wonderful kids. I didn't work. I did a lot of volunteer stuff. I volunteered and was president of practically everything I could think of. But I must say, I got a little bit bored. And several times I thought of going back to grad school, but Jack discouraged me because we were living a nice life. We had a lot of vacations. We had a summer home. I couldn't have done that if I'd gone back to work. So I didn't. So anyway, my kids all went off to school. And I was home and I was kind of lonely. And Jack and I went to a St. Lawrence event in New York City. And there I met, again, my college love. And so he got divorced and I got divorced and we got married. That was very interesting. He was a lawyer. I moved to Westchester County. I decided I wanted to know what he was talking about, so I went back to school and got a paralegal certificate. We disrupted 2 nice families. He had a good wife, I had a good husband. We just thought it was our time. And after about 6 years, we discovered it wasn't our time. So we separated. I came back to Rochester and I got a job at WXXI. When I had lived here before, I had been on the XXI board. So anyway, I called Bill Pierce. He invited me to lunch and I started work at XXI. And that was fun. I loved it. And I was here for 1.5 years or so. And then I decided that that wasn't quite enough for me, although I had met some really interesting people. I should tell you, at that time in my life, I was searching for a lot. And I met a nice guy who was a facilitator at a neutral ground thing that I was going to. And he was singing in a choir at Bethel Full Gospel Church downtown. So I went a few times to listen to him in the choir. I met some of his friends and I began to go to Bethel. I went to Wednesday night Bible class and all these people, these marvelous people, I've never known such marvelous people until I met all of you. Anyway, they were all born again Christians. And I tried for 1.5 years to be born again. I argued with the minister, unfortunately, and it was not a good experience, but I did go every Sunday and I really tried hard. But anyway, I eventually decided that I still loved this man named Joe. So I packed up once more, went back down, and Joe and I put our lives back together. I got a wonderful job at the College of New Rochelle, and everything was coming up roses, except the marriage. Well, by then I had found a Assembly of God church in White Plains. And I went and I met a marvelous woman and some other people. And I went to Bible study with them. And I was absorbed with the Bible and Christianity and all these people that I knew. And that helped me. Joe and I separated again, and I rented a house from one of the ladies in the church who was going to Arizona, and I lived in her old house for the whole winter. I got up in the morning and I read my Bible. I went to work. I loved my job. I came home alone, had dinner, spent the evening sitting in front of the fire because of the drafty old house with my Bible and other books. And I had an interesting year. I kind of call it the winter of my discontent. I finally came out of that, decided to move once more back to Rochester, came back to Rochester and found a condo. Joe and I finally divorced. And for 10 years, I was a single woman in Rochester in my 50s. I'd never been single before. I didn't even know what it was like. Let me tell you, it was terrific. I had a wonderful time. I met wonderful people. I joined the Third Presbyterian Church. I decided I can't be born again, but I like Third Pres and their social justice issues. And anyway, I went to Third Pres for about 10 years. And I was working at XXI for many of those years. Before that, I worked for the United Way, which was also a wonderful job. I always worked for nonprofits. And people used to ask me, how can you ask for money? How can you stand being turned down? And I said, well, nobody likes to be rejected, but if you've got a cause you believe in and you can get someone else to believe in it and support it, it's just a wonderful feeling. So that's what I did for about 10 years there. My kids were grown up. I had some grandchildren. I traveled a lot. Those were really fun years. I had a really good time. And then I met John Parker. Well, that was an interesting thing too. We had some mutual friends, and we both lived in Rochester all these years and never met. Anyway, I met John. He had a wonderful boat. He was a great guy. He didn't like Third Presbyterian Church, but he was going to the Unitarian Church. And I said, well, I know Dick and Joyce Gilbert. I've known them for years, and I'm happy to go back there. So 25 years ago, I went back to the Unitarian Church, where I've been ever since. And that was one of the best things I ever did. I just loved it. I've been involved with Soul Matters and a writers group and a Buddha group. And I think the most interesting thing that happened to me in the church area was years ago when Scott and Karen were there and we were having some problems. And I don't know whether you remember David Blanchard. He was one of our ministers. David's parents and I had been friends in college, and David and my daughter had both gone to St. Lawrence and were friends. So when David came to Rochester, I was so happy to see him. And he let me know mid-year that year that he wasn't going to be coming back, and really upset me. I was concerned about things at the church anyway. So I got together with Ruth Myers and Glenn Cook, and we put together a petition. Some of you remember, I know Barbara remembers this well. And we've got 60 names on a petition in a couple of days. And the petition asked the board to contact the UU and have them send someone down to see if they could resolve some of the problems we were having. So that did happen. And it was a difficult year for all of us. But I learned a lot, and I have a lot of respect for the people who worked through that, the board and the mediators, and it was a hard time, as you all know if you were there. But we've come through it, and here we are now with Sherry, and it's wonderful. I do want to say one other thing about Unitarian Universalism. My father-in-law, Jack Brush's dad, had been a Universalist minister. He had gone to St. Lawrence as well and became a Universalist minister. Well, he stayed in the ministry about 10 years, and then he left for a variety of reasons and moved to Rochester and started a family business. So by the time I met Jack, his dad was not a minister anymore, but he was very active in the Universalist Church, even nationally. And so during the 60s, when the two groups were trying to merge, the Universalists and Unitarians, my father-in-law was kind of semi-retired by then, and the Universalist Association asked him if he would go around the country and visit all of the small Universalist churches and encourage them to vote for the merger. So he, on his own, with his own money, spent the better part of 9 months driving around the country and visiting all these little churches. And I guess he was persuasive because the merger happened, as you know. But he was a very interesting man. I learned a lot from him as well. So anyway, that's a brief. Oh, I have to tell you, John and I have had the most marvelous time. We both retired the year after we met and got married, and we've traveled. We've had a multiple family, lots of people. Between us, we have 18 grandchildren, 5 greats, and I have 2 more greats on the way. So I like to tell people that I married the 3 nicest men I ever met. I know that sounds strange, but Jack Brush was a fine guy. Joe Manetti, my second husband, had his problems, as we all do, but he was the love of my life. And John Parker has just been great. We've been married 25 years. We love the church. We've moved to the Highlands, have a little cottage here, so we're well taken care of. Thank God we're here during this terrible time with the virus. So I don't know how long I've taken, Libby, but that's a brief introduction to 89 wonderful years.
You're good, Nancy. It was less than 20 minutes. Just thank you so much. So I'm going to see if I'm going to stop recording.